Good day, everyone. As promised, I'm sending today the second tranche of week one's lecture. The last we will do next Monday or tomorrow. So, this is an important turning point in our lecture, and it leaps off from where we ended up last week. Until now, we have been discussing concepts. Now we begin discussing power. Notice the statement on the slide. Every public administrator possesses power. Sometimes people imagine power belonging only to presidents, governors, cabinet secretaries, or even members of Congress. But public administration teaches us something different. Power exists whenever one person's decision changes another person's life. A barangay secretary possesses power. A budget officer possesses power. A licensing officer possesses power. A procurement committee possesses power. A school principal possesses power. A municipal agriculturist possesses power. Even a frontline employee at a government service window possesses power because that employee determines how citizens experience government. Notice that power itself is morally neutral. Power is simply the capacity to affect reality. Like electricity, power can illuminate or destroy. Everything depends upon how it is exercised. This is why ethics becomes inseparable from leadership. The more people depend upon your decisions, the greater your moral responsibility becomes. Notice something else. Ethical questions, says the slide, cannot be avoided. This is true because every administrative decision benefits some people, burdens others, allocates limited resources, establishes priorities, or shapes opportunities. No public decision is morally empty. Even refusing to decide is itself an ethical decision because delay affects citizens. Leadership, therefore, always carries ethical significance. Whether we recognize it or not, every exercise of public authority becomes an exercise of moral responsibility. Let us make this idea much more concrete by examining the ordinary powers that public administrators exercise every single day. When people hear the word power, they often imagine dramatic political speeches or national elections. But administrative power usually appears much more quietly. Notice the four examples here. First, budgets. Approving or denying funding determines which communities receive roads, schools, health centers, scholarship, or disaster assistance. Budgets are never merely numbers. They reveal priorities. Every peso allocated reflects a judgment about what matters most. Second, personnel, hiring, promoting, evaluating, disciplining, or dismissing employees profoundly affects lives. Administrative decisions shape careers, families, workplace morale, and institutional culture. Fair personal decisions create trust. Unfair ones create resentment that may even last for years. Third, permits. Issuing or withholding permits influences who may benefit businesses, build structures, operate services, or participate in economic life. One signature, one signature can determine whether an entrepreneur or entrepreneur succeeds or fails. That signature, therefore, carries ethical weight. Fourth, policy. Many administrators do not create laws. Instead, they interpret and implement them. Yet implementation determines how citizens actually experience government. Two offices may implement the same regulation very differently. One may treat citizens respectfully, another may treat them with indifference. The written policy remains identical. The lived experience becomes completely different. This is why administration is never simply mechanical. Look at the statement below. Leadership always changes the lives of others. That sentence captures the entire meaning of administrative justice, ethics. Power is measured not by the size of one's office, but by the extent to which one's decisions shape human lives. The greater the power, the greater the ethical responsibility. This is not merely a philosophical claim. It is the daily reality of public administration. Every form signed, every budget approved, every permit issued, every employee evaluated, and every policy implemented leaves traces in the lives of citizens. Ethical leadership begins where administrators never lose sight of those human consequences. So we have now established that power already carries moral responsibility. The next question is whether this insight belongs only to one philosophical tradition or whether it appears across civilizations. As we shall see next, thinkers from Confucius or Confucius to Aristoteles, Aquinas, Kant, and Rawls all arrive at a remarkably similar conclusion. The legitimacy of power depends upon the moral character of those who exercise it. Let's look at the universal principle across civilizations. Up to this point, we have established one important insight. Power always carries ethical responsibility. The question now becomes whether this idea belongs only to one culture or one philosophical tradition. The answer that you can see from this slide is obviously a resounding no. One of the remarkable discoveries in the history of ideas is that civilizations separated by geography, language, and religion repeatedly arrived at the same conclusion. Those who possess power possess greater moral responsibility. Look carefully at the thinkers we will look at. They disagree about many things. They lived centuries apart. They actually belong to different civilizations, yet they converge on these insights. Confucius tells us that government begins with the moral cultivation of the leader. A leader governs not first by commands, but by example. Virtue radiates outward. Citizens imitate what leaders repeatedly embody. A corrupt society is often the reflection of corrupt leadership. Aristotle approaches the same question differently. For him, political leadership exists not for the happiness of rulers, but for the flourishing of the entire community. Leadership is measured by whether citizens become more capable of living better lives. Thomas Aquinas deepens this tradition also by arguing that authority derives its legitimacy from the common good. Power exists for service. The moment authority consistently pursues private interest instead of public welfare, it loses its moral justification. Kant shifts our attention from outcomes to duty. He reminds us that public office does not exempt anyone from morality. Rank creates greater responsibility, not moral privilege. A cabinet secretary remains bound by the same ethical duties as an ordinary citizen. Finally, John Rawls asks us to design institutions that would remain fair regardless of where we ourselves eventually stand. Justice, therefore, protects especially those with the least power. Notice what all five thinkers quietly assume. None asks first, how do I become powerful? They ask instead, how should power be exercised. This distinction is fundamental. Leadership is not primarily about acquiring authority. It is about becoming worthy of authority. That is why ethics precedes administration. Character precedes policy. And virtue precedes governance. Philosophy becomes meaningful only when it illuminates ordinary life. Let us therefore move from these great thinkers to the smallest political unit in the Philippines. And what's that? The barangay. Sometimes philosophy appears distant. People imagine Aristotle, Confucius, or Kant speaking only about presidents and kings. But ethics becomes real only when we descend into ordinary governance. That is precisely why this exercise focuses on a barangay captain. Read the list carefully. Signing barangay clearances, mediating neighborhood disputes, allocating calamity funds, endorsing local projects, organizing community programs, deploying tanod, issuing business permits, setting meeting agendas, selecting beneficiaries, representing the community. At first glance, these appears to be routine administrative duties. But notice something deeper. Every single one of these powers changes someone's life. Approving a clearance may determine whether someone gets employed. Selecting beneficiaries may determine which family receives assistance after a typhoon. Issuing permits affects whether livelihoods begin or disappear. Mediating disputes influences whether neighbors become reconciled or enemies. Deploying barangay tanod shapes public safety. Even deciding the agenda of a meeting influences which concerns receive attention and which concerns remain unheard. Now ask the second question. Which of these powers can be abused? The answer is immediate. All of them. This is why power itself is morally neutral. Power has no ethical quality apart from the one who exercises it. The same authority can become justice or favoritism. The same office can become service or exploitation. The same signature can become liberation or oppression. This insight extends far beyond barangay governance. The administrative assistant who controls schedules possesses power. The accountant approving reimbursements possesses power. The HR officer recommending promotions possesses power. The budget officer possesses power. The professor grading papers possesses power. Every institution distributes power. Therefore, every institution requires ethics. Ethics begins precisely because our decisions never affect only ourselves. If every exercise of power carries moral significance, then we naturally ask another question. What should guide the person who exercises power? What should guide the person who exercises power? Our first answer comes from the philosopher who laid the foundation of virtue ethics. His name is Aristotle, or in Greek, Aristoteles. We now begin examining the major ethical traditions that continue shaping public administration today. Of course, I know I will never do justice to these ethical principles. In the PhD program where I finished, each of these philosophers constitutes a semester of rigorous reading and understanding. And yet, I will reduce them only to a few slides. You're not anyway studying a PhD in philo, but a Doctor of Public Administration. Making the point is enough, and if you're interested, please do not hesitate to check their books. We begin with Aristotle. Why Aristotle first? Not because he answers every ethical question, rather because he asks the question that every later philosopher must answer. Aristotle asks, what kind of person should a leader become? Notice that this differs from the modern tendency to ask, what policy should we implement? Or what regulation should we follow? Aristotle believes these questions are secondary. Before asking what decisions should be made, we must ask what kind of human being is making those decisions. An honest decision usually comes from an honest person. A courageous decision usually comes from someone who has cultivated courage. Justice cannot consistently emerge from an unjust character. Let me repeat that, because justice cannot emerge from an unjust character. This is why Aristotle begins not with institutions, but with persons. Public administration, therefore, begins long before entering office. Leadership begins in the gradual formation of character. Every habit contributes to the person we eventually become. Every small decision shapes future judgment, and every repeated action slowly becomes disposition. Aristotle, therefore, invites us to think of ethics not as rule following, yung pagsunod lang ng batas, but as self-cultivation, pagsasaayos ng sarili, pagpapatubo ng sarili. Leadership begins with becoming the kind of person capable of exercising power well. Yung may kapangyarihan, pero ginagawa ng mabuti. Yan yung galing ni Aristoteles. Meron siyang ng mabuti. No? That's virtuously, or better yet, excellently. Yun yung sinasabi ni Aristotle. At yan yung galing niya. So Aristotle now asks a more profound question. If leadership concerns becoming good, what exactly is the good toward which every human action aims? What is that good that every human action aims? Aristotle says every action seeks some good. So we introduce perhaps the most famous sentence in Aristotle's Ethica Nicomacheia, or Nicomachean Ethics. This is a very important book to consider. If you want it, I can send you the file. Every inquiry and every art, or every art and every inquiry, nagiging dyslexic na yata ako. And similarly, every action and pursuit is thought to aim at some good. Notice the breadth, yung lawak of that statement. Every action, not some action. Every action. The every there is relatively simple because every basically means all actions. All actions. Every harmful actions. Every, no, not just some. Every harmful action usually pursues something the person considers good. So a corrupt official may pursue wealth, a dictator may pursue security, a dishonest employee may pursue convenience. The problem is not that people pursue goods. The problem is that they often pursue lesser goods while sacrificing greater ones. Ulitin natin ha. So, everything, every action. So, will pursue some good. So even harmful actions, will actually aim at some good. So a corrupt official pursuing wealth, a dictator pursuing security, a dishonest employee pursuing convenience, these are all goods. But the problem is not that people pursue goods, as we've said. Ang problema, pinipili yung mas mababang kabutihan kaysa sa mas mataas na uri ng kabutihan. Meron daw hanay yung mga mabuti at kung ihahanay lang natin lahat ng mabuti, matatanto natin may mabababang uri ng kabutihan at may matataas na uri ng kabutihan at ang problema ay hindi yung pagpili natin ng mabuti pero yung pagpili natin ng kalidad ng kabutihan. We choose lesser goods. That's where the problem happens. For Aristotle, politics exists because individual goods alone are insufficient. The highest political purpose is not private success. It is what Aristotle calls eudaimonia. Eudaimonia. This Greek word is often translated as happiness. But that translation, happiness, is weak. Eudaimonia means flourishing. I'm actually home this Sunday morning, but I like to show to you what I will do next because outside I have my bonsai and these cats are playing on my bonsai. So I will disrupt the discussion a bit and just notice what they are doing with my gardens. So, sinita ko lang, this is my garden by the way. I have bonsai. Pero yung isang pusa, natuwa siya masyado sa halaman ko. But now that I noticed, okay na siya. Sorry for that. And apologies that I disrupted class only because there's a cat who was playing on my bonsai. But anyway, nawala ako sa aking discussion dahil sa pusa. Balik na tayo. So eudaimonia, no? So eudaimonia, EU, D-A-I, ammonia, M-O-N-I-A. Eu means good. Di ba? When someone dies, we give a eulogy. You, good, logy, words. Good words. Eudaimonia, you is good, daimon is spirit. Eudaimonia. Eudaimonia as a word means flourishing. It means becoming fully human. A society flourishes when citizens can develop their capacities, participate in civic life, receive education, enjoy security, raise families, and pursue meaningful lives. Notice, therefore, how Aristotle transforms our understanding of leadership. A mayor is not merely constructing roads. A governor is not merely approving budgets. A public administrator is not merely possessing documents. Each is creating or preventing the conditions under which people may flourish. Leadership, therefore, becomes profoundly human. Profoundly human. Budgets become moral documents. Policies become expressions of human priorities. Administration becomes the architecture of human flourishing. But if flourishing depends upon good leaders, another question immediately arises. How does one become good? And Aristotle answers by shifting our attention away from isolated actions towards something much deeper. And what is that? Character. Notice the movement presented on the slide. Actions, habits, or in Greek we call it hexes, and then character. At first glance, this appears to be three separate ideas. For Aristotle, they describe one continuous process. Every action leaves something behind. So whenever we repeat the same action, repetition becomes habit. And when habits become stable, they eventually form character. Habits and character. Ang galing, di ba? Character, therefore, is never inherited. It is cultivated. Hindi na mamana yung pagiging mabuting tao. Walang ganun. It's cultivated. Think of honesty. Nobody becomes honest by accident, or nobody becomes honest by accidentally telling the truth once. One becomes honest by repeatedly choosing the truth, even when lying appears easier. Eventually, honesty no longer feels like a difficult decision. It becomes part of who the person is. The same applies to courage. The courageous leader is not fearless. Rather, courage has become habitual. Justice, generosity, humility, prudence, and integrity all develop in this way. This insight has enormous implications for public administration. Many ethics seminars focus on teaching rules. Aristotle reminds us that ethical government ultimately depends less on knowing rules than on forming persons. Policies matter, regulations matter, codes of conduct matter, but institutions eventually become reflections of the character of the people who inhabit them. This explains why two offices with identical rules may produce completely different organizational cultures. One inspires trust, the other breeds fear. The difference often lies not in the manual, but in the character of the leaders. Aristotle therefore leaves us with a simple but demanding insight. Every decision today is quietly shaping the kind of leader you will become tomorrow. Every decision today is quietly shaping the kind of leader you will become tomorrow. Character, however, is not enough also by itself. It has value, of course, by all means, but it's not enough. Good leaders must also know how to judge wisely in situations where no rule book provides a clear answer. Aristotle calls these phroneses or practical wisdom, which becomes the subject of our next discussion. In fact, many people already talk about phronetic leadership, something like that. Phronesis. That's a Greek term which refers to practical wisdom or prudence in English. So one of the Aristotle's greatest contribution to ethics is a word that has no perfect English equivalent. In fact, even eudaimonia has no perfect equivalent. Even character or virtue has no equivalent. In fact, virtue, we translate it as virtue, but it's actually excellence, arete, arete. But we look now at phronesis. One of Aristotle's greatest contributions to ethics is a word that has no perfect English equivalent, as we've said, often translated as practical wisdom, but we should understand it as something richer than intelligence or technical expertise. Practical wisdom is the ability to discern the right course of action in concrete situations where rules alone are insufficient. It's quite simple. Like if I simply ask you, how many among us here knows that lying is wrong? Yung alam na mali magsinungaling. Maybe all of you will raise your hand. But if I tell you, but who among us in this room have never lied? Baka walang magtaas ng kamay. To know is not the same as to do. Yun lang naman yung point ko, 'di ba? Uh, to know is not the same as to do. Kaya hindi dahil alam mo na alam mo, na ginagawa mo, magkaiba yun, 'di ba? Uh, so to know is not to do. Now, let's look at, so phronesis technically is that ability to discern the right course of action in concrete situations when rules doesn't fit. Look at the first point. Rules are never enough. This is particularly relevant to public administration. Government agencies produce manuals, administrative orders, circulars, executive issuances, procurement regulations, civil service rules, and standard operating procedures. These documents are necessary because they establish consistency and fairness. But no manual can anticipate every circumstance that a public official will encounter. Consider a disaster after a typhoon. The guidelines may specify who qualifies for emergency assistance. But what if a family falls just outside the criteria while obviously facing severe hardship? What if strict compliance with the rule produces an outcome that contradicts the very purpose of disaster relief? Or imagine a hospital administrator during an epidemic. Policies exist, yet the situation evolves faster than the regulations can be updated. Every day requires decisions that no handbook anticipated. This is what Aristotle means. Rules provide direction, but they cannot replace judgment. Now look at the second point. Discernment must be developed. Practical wisdom is not something we are born with. A newly elected mayor and a mayor who has served faithfully for 20 years may possess the same legal authority, but they do not necessarily possess the same practical wisdom. Wisdom grows through experience. More precisely, it grows through reflected experience. Many people accumulate years without accumulating wisdom. Experience alone does not teach. Reflection upon experience teaches. So every difficult decision becomes an opportunity to learn how competing goods interact. This is why mentoring remains important in public administration. Experienced leaders help younger administrators perceive dimensions of situations that are not immediately or obviously visible. Hindi sapat na danasin yung isang bagay. Kailangan pagmunihan rin. Kailangang hayaan yung karanasan na baguhin yung pananaw o punto de vista. Hindi pwedeng pwede na. Finally, notice the third point. Arete or virtue enables discernment. This may sound surprising, and many people think judgment depends primarily on intelligence. Aristotle disagrees. He argues that character shapes perception. An honest leader notices conflicts of interest more quickly than a dishonest one. A compassionate leader recognizes human suffering sooner than an indifferent one. A humble leader listens before deciding. A proud leader assumes he already knows. In other words, we do not merely decide according to our character. We actually see according to our character. Two officials may confront the same situation and one sees only personal advantage, the other sees the common good. The external circumstances remain identical. The difference lies within the person observing them. That is why Aristotle believes virtue precedes wisdom. Without moral character, intelligence can become manipulation. Without integrity, technical competence can become corruption. For Aristotle, therefore, the wisest administrator is not necessarily the one with the highest IQ. It is the one whose character has been formed by years of practicing justice, courage, honesty, moderation, and prudence. So far, Aristotle has asked us one fundamental question. What kind of person should a leader become? The next philosopher begins somewhere very entirely different. Instead of asking who we should become, he asks, what is our duty? What is our duty? We now arrive at one of the most influential moral philosophers in modern history. I mean, Aristotle too is influential, but Kant, he's also influential. Ancient history, Aristotle is from ancient history, Kant is from modern history. Notice the subtitle, Duty Before Consequences. Immediately, we recognize that Kant is taking us in a different direction from Aristotle. Aristotle focused on character. Kant focuses on obligation. Dion. Aristotle asked, what kind of person should I become? Kant asks, what must I do regardless of the outcome? This difference may appear small, but it changes the entire structure of ethics. Imagine two public officials who refuse a bribe. The first refuses because accepting the money would violate his integrity. The second refuses because accepting the money violates his duty. Both reject corruption, but they explain their action differently. For Aristotle, morality grows from virtue. For Kant, morality grows from obligation. Notice something else. Kant does not begin with happiness. He does not begin with flourishing. He begins instead with reason. Every rational person possesses moral obligations that do not disappear because circumstances become inconvenient. This means ethical duties remain stable. They are not negotiated according to personal preference. They are not suspended during political crises. They do not disappear because the public never discovers the wrongdoing. Duty remains duty, whether someone is watching or not, whether obedience becomes costly or not, whether success follows or not. Kant, therefore, introduces a demanding vision of public leadership. The ethical public official fulfills obligations not because doing so is advantageous, but because doing so is right. But why should duty remain binding even when breaking it appears to produce better results? Kant answers the question directly in the next slide. Suppose telling one small lie saves you embarrassment. Most people instinctively begin calculating consequences. Will anyone get hurt? Will anyone discover it? Will it solve the immediate problem? Notice that Kant refuses to begin with these questions. Instead, he asks something much more fundamental. Can the principle behind my action become a universal rule? That means, is my action generalizable? This is the heart of Kant's categorical imperative. Imperative, utos, categorical, kautusang walang pasubali. Kautusang walang pasubali. That's categorical imperative. Imagine that everyone lied whenever telling the truth became inconvenient. What would happen? Gradually, promises would become meaningless. Contracts would lose credibility. Court testimony would become unreliable. Public announcements would be doubted. Even language itself would lose its function because communication depends upon the assumption that truth remains possible. Notice, therefore, that Kant is not saying lying is wrong because it usually produces bad consequences. He argues something deeper. Lying contradicts the very conditions that make truthful communication possible. Now apply this to public administration. Suppose every procurement officer manipulated bids whenever it benefited personal friends. Suppose every licensing officer accepted favors. Suppose every public official ignored regulations whenever convenient. Government itself would cease functioning. Trust would disappear. Institutional cooperation would collapse. Kant teaches us that ethical principles cannot be based merely upon convenience. They must remain valid for everyone. Otherwise, morality becomes nothing more than personal preference. For Kant, ethical leadership means asking one simple but demanding question before every decision. Would I want every public official to act according to the same principle I am about to follow? Would I want every public official to act according to the same principle I am about to follow? If the answer is no, then the action is already morally suspect. Philosophical principles become clearer when placed inside real situations. Let's illustrate Kant's ethics using one of the most familiar temptations in public office. Integrity when no one is looking. I did my best to capture Kant's ethics better than any abstract definition could. Imagine a mayor receives an offer. No investigators are watching. No audit will uncover the transaction. No journalist will report it. No citizen will ever know. Should the mayor accept the bribe? Many people immediately answer no, because eventually someone might discover it. Notice that this is not Kant's answer. Fear of punishment is not morality. Fear merely explains cautious behavior. A person who refuses corruption only because of fear has not yet become ethical. That person has simply become strategic, not ethical. Kant insists that morality begins precisely when external incentives disappear. Why refuse the bribe? Because honesty is a duty. Not because honesty is profitable, not because honesty enhances public image, not because honesty protects one's political career, but because honesty respects persons. Look at the final point on this slide. Citizens are not means to our enrichment. They are ends in themselves. This may be Kant's most influential contribution to modern ethics. Human beings possess intrinsic dignity. They must never become tools for someone else's ambition. So when a public official steals public funds, citizens become instruments for personal wealth. When a politician manipulates voters through deception, some people become tools rather than persons. And that's also important to pay attention to. Sorry. When government resources serve private interests, the public would feel not respected. Kant therefore insists that integrity reveals itself most clearly when recognition disappears. Anyone can appear ethical under surveillance. Only genuine integrity remains ethical in solitude. That insight remains profoundly relevant for every public servant. Kant has shown us one way of making ethical decisions by means of universal duty, yet another tradition proposes something very different, and that will be the topic that we'll look at on the next series of lecture. Instead of asking what is universally right, this one, the next ethical principle, will consider the greatest overall benefit or the greatest happiness of the greatest number. I'll stop the recording there and open my video because we're done already with parts 4 to 6 of the lecture. the lecture shifted the discussion already from the moral foundations of public administration to the ethical exercise of power. Having established that ethics undergirds legitimate governance, the lecture now asks how power ought to be exercised and what qualities distinguish an ethical public leader. Drawing from major philosophical traditions now, the discussion demonstrates that ethics is not merely a collection of rules, but a sustained reflection on the responsible use of authority. Across diverse civilizations and philosophical traditions, a common insight emerges. The greatest power over the lives of others, the greater one's moral responsibility toward the common good. So we first examined those relationship, and we basically focused only on two of the many. Huh? So we introduced this lecture with Aristotle's virtue ethics, and then we tried to look at the role of the leader in self-cultivation, the role of phronesis, and then we've also looked at Kant's deontological ethics, where we shift from character to duty, and how duty is a very important element in understanding categorical imperative. Taken together in this previous hour, we tried to present ethical leadership as a convergence of moral responsibility, virtuous character, prudent judgment, unwavering commitment to duty. Public authority is shown to derive its legitimacy not merely from legal appointment or institutional position, but the ethical quality of the person who possesses it. In the succeeding discussions, we'll look at utilitarianism and other contemporary public decision making, and just wait for it, please. Tomorrow, I will upload it tomorrow as promised. And then please take note that we're doing the class instead of 3 hours straight, chunks, chunks, chunks. And this is the second chunk of week 1. I still owe you one one video recording for week 1, and then the 3 videos for week 2, because this is already week 2 technically. Have a good day, everyone. Thank you.